The gun didn't make a sound when he set it on the counter. That was the part she'd remember later, not the weapon itself but the silence of it. The way it just appeared on the laminate surface between them like something that had always been there, the way dangerous things always seem obvious in retrospect. Maya's hand was still wrapped around the coffee pot. The breakfast rush had cleared 20 minutes ago and the diner was empty except for the two of them and the sound of grease settling in the fryer and her own heartbeat, which had relocated to her throat. "You took something," the man said. He wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at her. That was worse. "I found money in a booth cushion." Her voice came out level. She didn't know how. $46. "I left everything else." "The everything else," he said, "is why I'm here instead of someone worse." She didn't ask what that meant. She understood exactly what it meant. Outside, a truck downshifted on Route 9 and the windows rattled in their frames and the world kept going, indifferent, enormous, completely unconcerned with what was happening inside this diner at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. The man picked up the gun, put it back in his jacket, slid a card across the counter, white, small, an address printed in plain type, a time. He walked out. The door chimed the same two-note chime it chimed for everyone. Maya set down the coffee pot. Her hand was shaking. She watched it shake the way you watch something that belongs to someone else. She put the card in her apron pocket and she went to turn on the second burner and she thought about Iris who was 8 months old and would need formula in 3 days, and she thought about the envelope she'd found 11 nights ago stuffed into the torn cushion of booth 6, and she thought about the $46 she'd taken and the $4,586 she'd put back and she thought, "You already knew this was coming. You knew it the morning after. You've been walking toward this counter for 11 days. She thought, so walk. Carmine arrived at 7:30 with his keys and his coffee thermos and the particular expression he wore every morning, which was not quite a frown and not quite watchfulness but somewhere between the two, the face of a man who'd run the same diner for 22 years and had learned that the diner would tell him what he needed to know if he paid attention. He looked at her twice before he spoke. "Somebody been in?" "Guy came looking for something he left." "Found it?" "Found what he needed." She refilled the napkin dispensers. Her hands had stopped shaking. "I might need to leave early tonight. If Brenda can cover close." Carmine poured his coffee and looked at her the way he occasionally looked at her, not with suspicion but with a kind of careful attention, the look of a man who had decided some time ago that this particular employee was worth paying attention to and was still in the process of figuring out why. "Brenda's on till 9, he said. "Thank you." He went to the back without asking anything else. This was one of the things she valued about Carmine, the way he measured his questions. She'd worked for men who asked too many. She knew the difference. She carried the card in her apron through 7 hours of service, through the breakfast regulars and the mid-morning coffee crowd and the lunch rush that hit like a wave and receded like one, through bad tips and good ones, through a table of 8 that took 40 minutes and left 15%, through the 2 p.m. lull when she ate half a turkey sandwich standing at the pass and thought about nothing in particular. She didn't take the card out. She'd memorized the address in the first 30 seconds and had been building a map of the warehouse district in her head all morning, plotting the bus routes, calculating the walk from the last stop. At 4:30 she called Mrs. Okafor downstairs. She said 2 hours, maybe 3. She said she'd be back before 9. She believed both of these things when she said them. She went home and fed Iris and changed her and handed her over at the downstairs door, and Iris grabbed Mrs. Okafor's cardigan button the way she always did, proprietary and complete, already moving on to the next interesting thing. Maya stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed. Just stood there. The building smelled like someone's dinner, garlic, something tomato-based, warm and ordinary and nothing to do with anything. She buttoned her coat and went. The warehouse district at dusk had its own specific atmosphere that Maya registered and filed without drama. River smell, diesel, the cold that lives in concrete, the particular quiet of a neighborhood that empties out at 5. Her footsteps on the sidewalk were too loud. She walked 4 blocks before she noticed the footsteps behind her, not threatening, not gaining, just matching. Pace for pace. She rounded a corner and they rounded it too, and she understood then that she wasn't being followed, she was being escorted, which was different, which was in some ways more unnerving because it meant they'd been watching her long enough to know her route before she'd chosen it. She kept walking. She'd come this far. The building was a converted textile warehouse, brick, 3 stories, ground floor windows bricked over so recently you could still see the original frames. Light above the loading dock door on the north side. She went toward it the way you go toward the only lit thing in a dark space because there was no other option that made sense. Inside, warmth. Real furniture. Rugs on the concrete floor, track lighting angled carefully, A long table with chairs, and on the far wall a painting that she looked at for 1 second before the man in the center of the room stood up and everything else became peripheral. 16 maybe? Silver hair, wool sweater, the kind of face that authority had carved into over decades, all planes and angles, nothing soft left but not cruel either. He stood like a man who'd spent his whole life in rooms where he was the one everyone else watched, and had stopped thinking about it so long ago that the ease of it had become structural, part of how his spine arranged itself. He looked at her. Then something happened in his expression that she'd never seen happen in a face before. A kind of detonation, controlled, internal, the blast contained entirely behind his eyes. "You have your mother's hands," he said. The room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. "You don't know my mother?" Maya said. "No." A pause that held something with mass. "Not anymore. My name is Raphael Voss. I knew your mother for 3 years. I've been looking for her for 22 years after that. 6 months ago, I found her obituary. The rug was dark red. She stared at a corner of it. Her feet were solid on the floor. She checked. "I don't understand what you're telling me," she said, and even as she said it she knew she was lying, because she understood exactly what he was telling her, because she'd done the arithmetic in the half-second between "I knew your mother" and 3 years, and the number she landed on was 23, which was her age, which was not a coincidence. "You're 23 years old," he said. "I was with your mother from the time she was 19 until she was 22. Stop." He stopped. She took 2 steps to the nearest chair and sat down without being invited to. He sat too, across the table, and he didn't rush her and he didn't speak and he didn't do any of the things people do when silence makes them uncomfortable, because the silence didn't seem to make him uncomfortable at all, which told her something. "My mother told me my father was someone who couldn't stay," she said. That was the entire story. No name, no photograph, no city. "Yes," he said. "That sounds like her. She was protecting me. She was protecting you. From you." He didn't look away. "Yes." The track lighting hummed. Somewhere deep in the building, a pipe knocked once and went quiet. Maya looked at this man, her mother's decision, her mother's secret, the absence her mother had constructed so carefully and maintained so completely that Maya had stopped wondering about it by 12, and she tried to find in his face something she recognized. Some corner of a feature. The angle of a jaw. She found nothing. Or she found too much. She couldn't tell which. "The money in the booth," she said. "A transit payment. My associate stored it there. It wasn't meant to be found. I only took $46. I know. I saw the footage." He paused. "You from the gas station. You and the baby." Something moved through her chest when he said that. She pressed it flat. "Her name is Iris." "Yes." His voice changed on that word. A frequency shift. "How old?" 8 months. He nodded, very slowly, in the way of someone receiving information they're going to spend a long time with. "And her father doesn't exist," Maya said. "As far as this conversation is concerned." He accepted that with another nod. No pushback. She made a small note of it. "What do you want?" she said. "From me. Specifically. Be direct, because I have a daughter to get back to and I'm not sitting in this building for longer than necessary." He unfolded his hands on the table. He seemed to make a decision. "I've spent 22 years looking for your mother and finding nothing, and 4 months ago I finally trace her to a small city in Connecticut and I find an obituary and a daughter's name." He looked at her. Actually looked at her, not the way people look when they're constructing what to say next, but the way people look when they're actually trying to see something. "I want to know you. I want to know the daughter she raised. That is the whole of what I want, and I understand that it may not be something you're willing to give, and I am prepared to accept that, but I needed to say it to your face." She held that. Turned it over. Checked for the edges. "What you are," she said. "The business. Say it plainly." He didn't flinch. "I move money and I move goods, and some of those goods and some of that money travels through channels that are not legal. I have done this for 40 years. I have been very good at it. People got hurt. Yes. By choices you made. Yes. And you're sitting here telling me you want to be, what? Part of my life. Part of Iris's life. I'm telling you what I want. What happens is up to you." He reached into his sweater pocket, slowly showing her the motion, and produced a photograph, which he set on the table and slid toward her without comment. She looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. Her mother. Younger than Maya had ever seen her, early 20s, hair loose, sitting somewhere with good light, laughing at something outside the frame. The laugh was real. Maya had spent 23 years studying her mother's face and she knew the difference between the real laugh and the performed one, And this was the real one, open-throated, unguarded, the one that only happened when her mother had forgotten to manage herself. Beside her, not looking at the camera, looking at her, a younger version of the man across the table. The softness that decades had carved away still present. And the expression on his face, looking at her mother in that photograph at that age, was the expression of a man who had not yet learned to contain himself. Maya set the photograph down. She was happy, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. For a while, he said. I believe she was. She put the photograph in her coat pocket. He didn't object. She walked home through the cold and she did not think about what had just happened. She was very precise about this. She allocated the 30-minute walk to the purely physical. Feet on pavement, breath in cold air, the bus at the corner, the 4 blocks from the stop to her building, the elevator that took 45 seconds she'd never been able to shorten. She was very good at compartmentalization. Her mother had taught her, by example, without ever naming the skill. She collected Iris from Mrs. Okafor, who handed her over with the particular efficiency of a woman who had done this exact handoff 60 or 70 times and saw no reason to add ceremony. Iris smelled like Mrs. Okafor's lavender soap and her own specific warmth and something underneath that was just Iris, just the fact of her, the concentrated specific reality of her daughter that hit Maya in the chest the same way it had hit her the first time and had not once diminished. She sat in the chair by the window with Iris on her chest and she let herself feel the size of the evening. She didn't collapse into it. She just felt it, let it move through her like weather, the way her mother had taught her, the way women who survive things teach their daughters to survive them. If you've ever held something small and been the only thing standing between it and a world that doesn't care, drop a like. So this reaches someone who needs to hear it tonight. She called the number on the card the next morning from the back steps of the diner, 6:50 a.m., the cold so sharp it burned the inside of her nose. The unremarkable man answered on the second ring. I have conditions, she said. Before anything. He said, go. Iris doesn't exist to his world. Not protected by it. Not adjacent to it. Absent from it completely. If that changes, if I find out anything connected to him has come anywhere near her, I take her and you don't find us. My mother spent 22 years being unfindable. She taught me how. Silence on the line. Second. I want independent legal counsel, a firm I find myself that has no prior relationship with him, that advises only me. I want to understand in writing what kind of exposure I carry if I have any ongoing contact with him. I'm not walking into something my daughter inherits. He'll agree to that. I'm not asking if he'll agree. I'm stating it as a condition. A longer pause. Yes. Third. He doesn't come to the diner. He doesn't come to my building. Meetings happen on my schedule at locations I choose and he comes alone. I'll relay that. Tell him I'll be in touch Thursday. She hung up. She found the attorney herself. 3 phone calls, 1 referral from a legal aid office that pointed her toward a woman who worked primarily with people who had complicated situations involving parties with significant resources. The attorney's name was Constance Park and she had an office with real plants and a handshake like a closed door and she listened to Maya's situation. All of it, no softening, and said nothing for 10 full seconds when Maya finished. Then, bring him in. I want to see him answer questions in a room he doesn't own. Maya called Raphael that evening. He answered on the first ring again, and she filed that detail in the place she kept things that told her something about a person. She said, I want you at the attorney's office. In person. I want to watch you answer questions in front of someone who isn't on your payroll. Pause. She counted the seconds. 3. All right, he said. You can have your lawyers in the lobby. Not the room. All right. Friday, 2 o'clock. I'll send the address. He came. His attorneys were visible through the glass wall of Constance Park's conference room, 2 men in good suits, waiting with the patience of people who were billing by the hour and had made their peace with it. Raphael sat across from Constance for 90 minutes and he answered everything she asked. He didn't hedge. He didn't redirect. He spoke about the structure of his organization with the flat precision of someone describing a plumbing system. Here is where the water goes, here is how the pressure works, here are the valves. Constance asked about a trafficking case from 2019 and he said 3 people had been prosecuted and he had restructured after and he no longer moved people. His voice was the same temperature when he said it as when he'd been describing the financial architecture. Maya sat at the end of the table and watched his hands, which were still, and his face, which was almost still, and the small thing that happened at the corner of his jaw when Constance asked a question he hadn't anticipated. He was afraid of the questions he hadn't anticipated. That told her something. After, in the elevator, she said, the trafficking case. You said you restructured. Yes. People were hurt before you did. Yes. By decisions you made. He looked at the elevator doors. Yes. The doors opened. They walked through the lobby past his attorneys, who fell in at a distance, professional and quiet. Outside on the sidewalk, the city went on doing what cities do, which was everything at once, indifferent to the specific gravity of any particular moment. I'm not here to absolve you, Maya said. I want to be clear about that. I know. I don't know what I'm here for yet. Neither do I, he said. I thought I did, and then I met you and I don't. She looked at him in the flat afternoon light. At the face she was still cataloging, the way his expression held itself in reserve, the thing that happened in his eyes when he was working not to show something, the particular way a person looks when they've spent decades controlling the room and are now in a room they can't control and are deciding, minute by minute, whether to keep trying. Her mother, at 22, had looked at this face and decided to leave. Had made the calculation that this man and this life and whatever he was becoming were not something she could raise a child inside of, and had gone, and had spent 22 years being right about that in ways Maya was still mapping. She didn't know yet if her mother had also been wrong about some things. That was a question for later. That was a question she was going to sit with for a long time before she touched it. Thursday, she said. 2 o'clock. The cafe on Mercer. You come alone. Yes. Bring nothing. She walked away. At the corner she didn't look back. This wasn't performance, she genuinely didn't need to. She was already thinking about the formula situation, which resolved itself temporarily through a WIC recertification she completed the following morning, 3 tins, covered, which bought her 6 weeks, and 6 weeks was not nothing. 6 weeks was a horizon she could work toward. Subscribe if you think the women who survive impossible things without asking for applause deserve to be heard. She went to the cafe on Thursday with Iris on her hip and a list of questions in her coat pocket, written in her careful narrow handwriting on the back of a receipt. She'd written them at 1 a.m. after Iris's last feeding, sitting at the kitchen table in the particular silence of a city after midnight, the city quiet that is not actually quiet but is a different register of sound, lower, continuous, the hum of a place that never fully sleeps. He was already there when she arrived. At a corner table, alone, coffee in front of him untouched. He stood when she came in and then stopped himself halfway through the motion and sat back down, recalibrated. She noted that too. The correction. The man who'd spent 40 years in rooms where everyone stood for him, now uncertain about the protocol. She sat across from him. Iris, confronted with a new face, did what Iris always did, stared at it with complete scientific focus. No performance. Just data collection. She'd been doing this since she was 3 months old, and it still undid Maya a little, the sheer intensity of her daughter's attention to the world. Raphael looked at Iris the way someone looks at something they were not prepared to find beautiful. Maya laid her list on the table. First question. The night my mother left you. What happened? He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I came home and she was gone. She'd left nothing, no note, nothing she'd moved or packed that I could find. She was simply not there. Pause. I'd had a difficult week. She'd seen things that week that she hadn't seen before. I think the week clarified something for her. What kind of things? He looked at his coffee. A negotiation that went wrong. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was, and it went wrong, and she saw what happens when something in my world goes wrong. Was she hurt? No. But she understood, after, what she was living inside of. The actual shape of it. He lifted his eyes. She never told me she was pregnant. I don't know when she found out. I don't know if she knew when she left or found out after. I think she may have known, and I think it may have been part of the calculation. Another reason. Maya made a small mark on her list. Second question. She came back. 14 years ago. You said she contacted you. She needed documents. An identity record she couldn't get through legitimate channels. Something connected to her original name that she needed to either secure or disappear. I provided it. I tried to find her after, and she'd already moved. What city was she in? Portland. At the time. Maya had been 9 years old and living in Portland. She had a specific memory of being 9 in Portland, of a school with yellow walls and a teacher named Mr. Abernethy who told her she was good at reading people. She had been 9 years old in Portland while her mother made contact, one time with the man she'd run from for something she needed, and had left again before anyone could follow. This was the thing about her mother that Maya had always felt without being able to name, the immensity of her management, the logistics of a life built to stay hidden, the energy it required, quiet and constant and invisible, the way structural work in a building is invisible until something fails. Nothing failed. Her mother had died at 46, cancer, managed alone, and nothing had failed. She was protecting you, Raphael said. Everything she did was constructed around that. 22 years of construction. I know, Maya said. Are you angry at her? The question landed without warning. She looked up. No, she said, and felt the truth of it in the way truth sometimes arrives, not as a thought but as a physical fact. I know people expect me to be the father I was never told about, the story she kept from me. But I understand the math. I've been doing it since I was 22 and found out I was pregnant and had to figure out what information was safe for a child to carry. She looked at him. Some information isn't safe. Some information is just weight. She decided I shouldn't carry it. And now I'm 23 and I can decide for myself what I carry. Iris had gotten bored with Raphael's face and moved on to the more interesting project of Maya's coat buttons, which she was working on with focused bilateral effort. Maya let her at them. They were sturdy. I want to ask you something, Raphael said. And you don't have to answer. She waited. When you found the money in the booth, you took $46. He held her eyes. Why 46? She hadn't expected that question either. She looked at her list, which didn't have it. Formula is $22 a tin, she said. I needed 2 tins. I took 22 and $2 for the bus. 46. She looked back up at him. I thought if I took less than 1% it was, I don't know what I thought. That it was closer to finding than stealing. That the math made it something I could live with. He was quiet for a moment. You made a rule for yourself in 30 seconds and followed it exactly. Yes. Your mother did that, he said. She made rules for herself. Private ones. She held to them in situations where no one would have known if she didn't. He looked at the table. I used to find it remarkable. That she held to rules no one was watching her keep. Iris finally got a button partially through its hole and made a sound of profound professional satisfaction. Maya looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the man across the table, her father, a word she was trying on in the privacy of her own head the way you try on a coat in a store, not deciding, just getting a sense of the weight and the fit. The word didn't break anything. It didn't transform anything. It sat there, uncertain, available. Constance Park is drawing up a structure, she said. Financial. If you want to put money into an account for Iris, education, future, something she accesses at 18, there's a way to do it that's clean. Firewalled. Nothing attached to anything you're connected to. It goes through a foundation Constance recommends, everything documented and legal and completely separate. She looked at him directly. I'm not taking money for myself. I'm not interested in that. But Iris didn't choose her circumstances any more than I chose mine, and if there's something that can make her options larger when she's grown, then refusing it on principle is just, she paused. It's just me punishing her for the choices the adults around her made. I'm not willing to do that. Raphael nodded. His hands had gone very still on the table. Yes, he said. I want that. Whatever structure Constance recommends. She'll have paperwork next week. I'll sign it. Iris looked up at Maya then, just looked up, direct, the full force of her attention which at 8 months old was already something, and Maya looked back and they held that for a moment, the ordinary miracle of it, this specific person who had not existed and then had existed and was now sitting on her mother's lap in a cafe working on a coat button with the focused determination of someone who intended to solve every problem she encountered by simply not stopping. If this story sat with you somewhere real, drop a like. Not for the algorithm. For every woman who built something out of nothing and never asked anyone to notice. She didn't fall in love with him. She didn't forgive him. She didn't fit him into the father-shaped space that her mother had left empty, because that space was a shape he didn't match and she had long ago stopped needing it to be filled. What she built was something without a name. He came to the cafe on Thursdays, alone, no gun in his jacket, coffee he actually drank. She brought her questions and he answered them, and sometimes the questions were about her mother and sometimes they were about who he was and sometimes, increasingly, they were about nothing in particular. The news, a film she'd watched, something Iris had done that week that required a witness. He was a good listener. She hadn't expected that. Men who spent their lives in rooms where they held all the power often lost the ability to listen, the skill having atrophied from disuse. He'd somehow kept it. She told Carmine. Not everything, she wasn't a person who told everything, but enough. She told him there was a man she was figuring out how to know, and that it was complicated, and that she might occasionally need to leave on time. Carmine said, "Leave on time. That's not complicated." She thought he probably understood more than she'd said. He was good at understanding more than you'd said. She didn't ask and he didn't tell, and that was its own kind of grace. The formula stopped being a crisis in stages. First the WIC recertification, then a raise at the diner that Carmine gave her without ceremony, just an extra amount on her check with no annotation. Then the foundation constants set up, which didn't provide anything immediately but existed now as a fact of Iris's future. A number in an account somewhere that Iris would access at 18 and that had no connection to anything Maya needed to explain. She never touched the money herself. She'd been clear about that from the beginning, and she stayed clear. She was her mother's daughter in this. She made rules for herself and she held to them when no one was watching. Iris turned 9 months, then 10. She learned to pull herself to standing by gripping the couch edge, and the look on her face when she got upright, the pure uncomplicated triumph of it, the absolute conviction that this was the best thing that had ever happened, was the same look she'd had when she got the button through the hole in the cafe, and Maya thought, she got that from somewhere. That specific quality of triumph. The way she meets an obstacle and treats it as a problem she simply hasn't solved yet. She didn't tell Iris. Iris was 10 months old. But she filed it. She would tell Iris someday, the right amount at the right time in the right language. She would give her daughter the information without the weight. She would tell her, there is a man and he was complicated and your grandmother made a decision and here is what I learned from all of it. She would give her the story and let Iris decide what she wanted to carry. On a Thursday in March, a month after the cafe on Mercer, Raphael arrived with something she hadn't told him to bring. A small stuffed animal, brown, a rabbit, worn slightly at one ear in the way of things that have been loved by someone else first. He set it on the table without ceremony. My daughter had one, he said. When she was young. Maya looked at him. You have other children. She died. 12 years ago. He said it the way he said hard things. Flat, no decoration, the information presented without demand for response. She was 31. She knew what I did. She made her own decision about it. Pause. She kept the rabbit for her children. When she passed her husband, they moved. The rabbit came to me somehow. I've kept it for 11 years not knowing why. Maya picked up the rabbit. It was soft in the way of things that have been washed many times. She put it on the table in front of Iris, who looked at it for a moment and then grabbed its ear with both hands and pulled it toward her with complete proprietary confidence. Raphael watched Iris hold the rabbit. Something moved through his face, not fast, not dramatic, but unmistakably real. The specific grief of a man who had lost something and was watching a version of it return in a form he hadn't imagined. Maya let him watch. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't manage the moment. She sat with her coffee and her daughter and the rabbit and the complicated truth of who this man was and what he'd cost and what he hadn't been able to avoid costing, and she let the moment be exactly as large as it was, no larger and no smaller, because her mother had taught her, by example, always by example, that the real work is never in the drama but in the sitting still inside the hard thing and not looking away. Outside March was trying. It was cold still, but the light was different. The quality of the afternoon had shifted, something in the angle, the city getting ready to turn a corner it turned every year whether anyone was ready or not. Iris held the rabbit against her chest and looked out the window at the light. Maya looked at her daughter looking at the light. This was not a story about forgiveness. It was not a story about a crime lord who found redemption through a grandchild and became something better. People don't work that way and she wasn't interested in that story. This was a story about a woman who took $46 from an envelope she shouldn't have opened, and held to the rules she made for herself in 30 seconds. And walked into a building she didn't have to walk into, and asked questions until she had enough answers to make a decision. This was a story about the decision. The decision was, here. Thursdays. Coffee she actually drank now. A daughter who didn't know yet what she carried or where it came from or what any of the adults in the rooms around her had cost each other. The decision was, I will not carry what she shouldn't carry, and I will not refuse what she deserves, and I will hold the line between those two things for as long as it takes. The decision was, forward. Iris made a sound against the rabbit's ear, not a word yet, but almost. The shape of one. The rehearsal for something she was almost ready to say. Maya reached across the table and turned her daughter toward the window, toward the March light, toward whatever was out there that was worth looking at, and she held her there, solid and complete, her daughter who would grow up knowing enough and being protected from enough and making her own rules someday for herself, her own rules she'd hold to when no one was watching. That was enough. That was, in the only accounting that mattered, exactly enough.